that. That is the discussion we are going to have today with Dan Garfield. Okay, you figured out that Kubernetes is the way to go for enterprises or even a smaller organization to deploy their applications. But how do you remove the friction and make sure the bits travel from developer laptop to the Kubernetes environment in a seamless way? That is the discussion we are going to have today. I have with me Dan Garfield from CodeFresh. Dan, can you introduce yourself and talk about briefly about CodeFresh?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Dan Garfield. I am the Chief Technology Evangelist for CodeFresh, and we are a DevOps automation platform currently on Kubernetes. We do have some legacy workloads in our customer base, but we really streamline for cloud-native workloads, serverless, Kubernetes, those kinds of things.
Awesome. Let's set some context first. Why is Kubernetes so popular among enterprises? And in fact, even startups are using Kubernetes for their application deployment. Why is it so popular? And based on your experience, are you seeing enterprises adopting Kubernetes in large scale? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, so there's actually a survey a few years ago asking people why they were choosing Kubernetes. And when you look at Kubernetes on paper, you'd think, well, this has multiple node support, so I can have scalable services, I can have reliability, and you'd think that those things might be the drivers. But in fact, almost everybody, I think it was over 80% in the survey that was run, said that the reason they picked Kubernetes was for developer velocity. So you might think, what does developer velocity have to do with Kubernetes? Well, with Kubernetes, you can define all of your services as code, as manifests. And so you can basically have very clear definitions of what your services are, how they should run, and how they should operate in different conditions. And so this means that the deployment process is much easier. Of course, you're using containers, and so you have portability across different networks, and you can use it on your local machine. You can use it elsewhere, and so these advantages make Kubernetes essentially an inevitability for underlying infrastructure because you can do it as code. And I can't tell you in my background how many times I've had to hand roll servers. Right, I used to do a kind of a side IT business where I would get called in if there was a huge problem with somebody's development stack. And I was really proud of myself because I could build and configure like a PHP LAMP stack or a LAMP stack using Nginx in about 20 minutes. And that was really impressive. And that is hilarious because now I can basically just create the configuration, just apply it. It's going to come out the same way that I expect every time. And now it's a matter of seconds, and I can automate the whole thing anyway. So that's really what's driving the adoption. It's the fact that you can do this infrastructure as code. You can do the service definition and the application definition as code. And that means that you can use it with DevOps and CI/CD tools much, much easier. And to answer your second question around adoption, yes, we have seen ubiquitous adoption of Kubernetes, but we haven't seen the adoption at depth yet. So what does that mean? Well, if you look around enterprises, you ask them, hey, are you using Kubernetes? Almost everyone will say yes. And then you ask, what percentage of your workloads are on Kubernetes? And we're talking 10%, maybe less than 10% of workloads have actually made it onto Kubernetes. And this is just the long slog of legacy and getting things transformed and getting things moved over. And of course, there are some applications that still struggle a little bit on Kubernetes. Stateful services, for example, running a database on Kubernetes is still a little bit of extra work. You really got to fine tune those storage providers to make that happen. But that ubiquitous kind of adoption, the benefits of Kubernetes are clear. The benefits of serverless, of containers, they're all clear. And so the adoption is just letting people actually digest it. The technology is ready. It's happening. It's growing very fast. And so it's been very exciting to watch that and be part of that in the community for the last couple of years.
Awesome. I do agree. In fact, even though it sort of like gives that developer velocity, there is still a long way to go before enterprises adopt it in full scale. And as you correctly pointed out, supporting stateful applications is still like in very early stages, and it's going to, and enterprises need stateful applications. Unless Kubernetes supports stateful applications out of the box in a seamless way, it's going to take some time. But I think in the next few years, that's going to improve, and we are going to see a lot more adoption with Kubernetes. Okay, let's now go one step further. You talked about developer velocity, but that velocity will make sense only if the bits are deployed in production at the same speed. So in order to do that, you need to set up a CI/CD workflow, a DevOps pipeline that sort of like makes it easy for the bits to flow from developer laptop to production, going through tests and release and everything. So can you talk about what is a typical CI/CD workflow in Kubernetes environments?
Yeah, so we've really been pushing standards around GitOps. And GitOps is basically the idea that you put your configuration into some kind of immutable version controlled storage like Git, and that as you make changes, your clusters should essentially automatically try to solve any discrepancy between that. And so it takes the state from your Git provider and it tries to apply that to your clusters. Now, this means that you have some implications around how the rest of your CI/CD, your DevOps workflows should be set up. It means you should be essentially setting up pipelines that can work across multiple microservices, multiple different repos. You should have shared pipelines so you can define them once and use them with all of your services. Otherwise, it's a scale problem. And this is actually the biggest issue with DevOps in Kubernetes today is scalability of handling microservices. It's not a problem specific to Kubernetes, but you see this very often where people are saying, you know, I now have 5,000 microservices and I have one repo, one service, and one pipeline for each one. And now I want to introduce a new security policy where everybody goes through this security scan check. So now I have 5,000 pipelines to update. This is kind of a nightmare. And frankly, it becomes a nightmare not only to manage, but to even tell what's going on, because you might have stuff running in production. And if you experience some kind of outage, some kind of service degradation, you're now trying to essentially debug 5,000 services at once. So this is an area that we've really been focused on. Oh, sorry, my camera crashed here. It'll restart here. This is an area that we've been really focused on and trying to resolve, is essentially making the scalability aspects work. So shared pipelines, so you can create a pipeline one time and have it work with lots of services, whether they're in a mono repo setup or across multiple repos. And then also being able to work at the scale of just having the visibility of what's going on. So we've been working on GitOps dashboards that basically show you the state of all of your services, all of the rollouts that have been happening. And so if there's a service degradation, you can basically look at the exact minute it happened. You can see all the rollouts that have occurred and you can address it right from there. So you're not, running around in Slack yelling across, 10,000 engineers trying to find out what went wrong. So those are really the areas of attention that I think are critical in order for people to get the most out of microservices. Because again, it's not scale that was the biggest thing that people needed. It was developer velocity. We're living in a world where there are more software engineers who work at non-tech companies than the ones who work at tech companies. And whichever one of those software engineers at the different companies, whichever one ships the most code the fastest that works is going to win whatever market share there is. So that's just the nature of the game. And so whoever controls the software development process, the delivery process of software, and can make it fast, that's the key to the future right there. And so that's where we're focused pretty much entirely.
Awesome. We will dig a little deeper into how some of the challenges faced by organizations in setting up the pipeline, DevOps pipeline. Before we go there, can we sort of talk about why GitOps is gaining so much traction? What is it in GitOps that is making GitOps gain so much traction among IT operations and developers, DevOps folks? So can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so the change is both technological and organizational. So the theory of GitOps, right? You have your configuration and your infrastructure should reflect that configuration. Well, that right there, that stake in the ground enforces a bunch of best practices right off the bat. Because I'll hear people say, well, I don't want to do GitOps because what if I don't want to deploy what's sitting in my my main branch or my master branch? And the answer is, it shouldn't be in your main or master branch if you don't want it deployed, right? So you actually need the checks to happen before that merge happens, right? So there are a lot of best practices that are sort of enforced with GitOps, but there are other issues that are solved as well. All next-gen GitOps operators, those are the deployment mechanisms that we use to actually make the deployments happen. They all run on the clusters and they pull changes rather than having changes pushed to them. So this means that you don't need to expose your Kubernetes API. You can actually have it totally blocked off and it just pulls changes onto the cluster when they become available. So this solves security problems as well. And I would also say that GitOps and standards in general, they're not black or white things. It's not an all or nothing game. What we see a lot of times is people come in and they adopt the first couple of principles of GitOps, and then they work on their organization for a while, and then they adopt more, right? So if you try to go from zero to 100, where it's, okay, we weren't using GitOps, now we're 100% GitOps all the time, we follow all the rules, you're going to have some growing pains within your organization as people have to deal with repos now being the source of truth in a way that hasn't existed before and having such a tight coupling to what's in production. So it does require some adjustments from an organizational standpoint, but GitOps actually has, and we're working on with the community, some best practices and some standards that can help people actually do this in a more structured way and making sure that they're successful with what they're doing, because the benefits once you've adopted are clear. It's about helping people get over the adoption curve.
So, like you talked about working with community on setting up some best practices for GitOps. So, how do you think you can scale it and take it to larger community? Do you think working with something like CNCF will help there, or what is the best way to take these best practices and help it reach a larger community?
Yeah, I think it's 100% something that the CNCF is just perfectly fit for, and that's where we would want to focus our attention. And then the problem space that we're trying to solve is larger than just how do you adopt the GitOps that exists today, but it's actually saying, okay, well, what if you have 10,000 clusters you need to update across multiple geos? How should that be set up? Does that mean I have to have 10,000 Git repos? Do I need to have 10,000 different Git branches? Is there some sort of policy of policies thing that I can do that's going to operate it across? That's like one of the problems that I think we'd like to solve. And so it's not just evangelizing the standards, but it's actually solving some of these problems that maybe that GitOps hasn't quite solved yet. I think we can solve them. I think there's a path forward. So working with the CNCF, working with other industry leaders, working with other companies, that's where our attention is right now.
Awesome. Let's sort of like go back to the original topic of this discussion. You already highlighted some of the challenges organizations face in setting up their DevOps pipeline, especially with Kubernetes. But enterprises are large, and as you already pointed out, there are a diverse set of applications and environments running around. So, as you talk to enterprise customers, what are some of the challenges you hear from them that is really impacting them in terms of sort of taking advantage of the developer velocity?
Yeah, so the challenges that keep people from solving the developer velocity, the biggest one on an emotional level is fear. Fear of downtime, fear of service degradation. And when you're running lots of microservices, it can be difficult to tell what's going on, and your deployment process can start to feel out of control, difficult to understand, and it feels like a black box. And I'm sure everybody's had this experience where there's some kind of service incident and Slack starts blowing up, tickets start blowing up. And the question is, why is this happening? What changed? What's different? And eventually maybe somebody tracks down, oh, actually, I just made this change. Maybe we should roll it back, and then you get there. But the time that it took you to get there is a long time. And it also means that all of these people had to be impacted from a workflow perspective to go try to solve this fire alarm. And of course, you've heard, it's very common in the industry, people say no deploy Fridays, right? No deploy Fridays. What does no deploy Friday means? No deploy Friday means that your deployment process is not reliable enough. It's not. Because if you aren't confident enough that you can deploy on a Friday, walk away, and it's not going to lose your weekend chasing down issues, then your development and release process could stand to be improved. Now, that's not to say you haven't made great strides. We've done some amazing things, of course, but we really should get to the point where we feel confident enough in our process where I can make a commit, I can make a push. There's automated testing, there's automated release, there's automated canary releases where even if there is an issue, it'll be caught automatically and rolled back and removed, so that we're not hamstringing our development process. So it's about getting confidence, and that means robust automation for sure, but it also means visibility, because if you have a whole bunch of automation but you don't have insight into what's actually happening, then you're not going to trust it. So you want visibility. You want to be able to see all your rollouts happening, where they're happening, what's the status of all my services. If there is an incident, can I just go directly to on the timeline to the spot where the incident started and see everything that happened at that moment, so I can actually drill down into what change might have caused this issue. So when you do that, that gives you the confidence to deploy dozens of times a day. That gives you the confidence to be able to deploy on Fridays, right? That gives you the confidence where you know your process is going to work. You can release software as fast as you can write it. And that means ultimately that you have a key advantage over competitors. If you can ship more code, you can do it faster than your competitors, you're going to innovate faster. And those changes are going to add up bit by bit every day, and it's going to put you in a totally different market position. So it really is fundamental to the way that every business operates, but it's also about making your engineers happy. How much happier are you if your automation process works and it catches things and you're confident in it? You're going to want to stay in that company. You're going to want to stay in that engineering team. So the benefits are just across the board, all over the place. There's no limit, really.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. But to do this automation, and in fact, to do this large scale automation, probably you need something like infrastructure as code, like Kubernetes, Terraform, and other platforms enable that. Do you think this kind of automation and the streamlining of DevOps pipeline is limited to platforms that embrace the philosophy of infrastructure as code? Or if I'm an enterprise and I have a really diverse set of platforms, will I be able to take advantage of these kind of streamlining?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, I'm a big believer that you should never let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And so the truth is that there are lots of principles from the way that we handle GitOps and service deployments to Kubernetes that can be applied to VMs, and should be, because they do realize real tangible benefits today. Does it mean that you can get all the way there? Probably not. You're probably not going to get as far as you could have gotten it with Kubernetes, but you don't have to get that far if you can just make an improvement today. And so I would say just never let the ideal potential end state prevent you from making improvements today and then taking those learnings going forward. It's really just, if you can make it a little bit of improvement every day, that adds up, right? And you'll get there.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about how you can streamline and overcome some of these challenges. Let's take the moment the bits leave developer laptops. What are some of the automation we can do, and what are some of the intelligence layers or the analytics layer we can take advantage of, so that we can track the bit as it moves from developer laptop to production, and also like immediately take action if something goes wrong. Can you walk us through the entire flow from the developer laptop to production, how this can be streamlined with respect to Kubernetes environments?
Yeah, so I'll speak to it first in a very specific way, and then I'm going to go more general. So the way that we do this at CodeFresh is because we're Git agnostic, we're tied into your source code provider, and we're cloud agnostic, so we're tied into the deployment environments. When a commit is made, the pipeline executes, it builds an artifact. That artifact is automatically tagged with the pipeline and the build that created it, as well as the commit that created it. That artifact is then usually automatically put into manifests, which are usually opened on an automated pull request or an automated commit onto your repo that it defines your deployment environments and the way your applications run. And so that manifest change is now tied to the asset, which is also tied to the repo, which is also tied to the commit, which is tied to the build, and all of that is together. And then when it's actually deployed into production, then I can actually look in production and see not only here's the build that was just run, here's the artifact that's been deployed, here's the manifest that was changed, here's the changelog, here's the repo that it came from, but I can actually go into the repo and see what JIRA tickets were actually being worked on. And I can expose that right onto the deployment. So if I'm looking at production, I can see, well, here's the timeline of every rollout that's happened. Here's where we might have had an issue. Here are the JIRA tickets associated. So now I have everybody, the committers, everything. So this visibility, this traceability, it's also a chain of trust, right? Because it solves the problem of provenance. Where did my change come from? I can see it right there. There's been a secure transaction. Nobody has access to the cluster. It's all happening in an automated way. So that really, really helps. Now, on the more general sense, you can think about your pipelines less as build engines, which I think people traditionally have, and more as policy engines. So I have a security policy. The security policy says that this scan runs on every image that is built, and that this is the security threshold that must be met in order for the build to succeed. And if it doesn't, we will fail the build and send it back to the engineer automatically. Now, that's a good thing because lots of times the security happens post facto, and that's not a great situation to be in, right? You have to then back your way into solving the problem. But instead, the developer who's making a change can actually get that feedback right away because the build has just happened, the pipeline has just run, and they get the feedback right away. Oh, actually, there's a security policy violation that needs to be resolved. So now they're in the mode of making changes. They've been working on the services. They haven't departed to go work on something else. So they can be much more productive in solving issues because they're getting feedback earlier. So I think security policy is a really good one. Obviously, lots of work has been done in testing. Another one that I think is really important and very good with Kubernetes is canary releases. Canary releases allow you to expose a new version of that you're rolling out to a small percentage of your audience. And this means that any issues that occur can be automatically dealt with and resolved with a rollback. And you have a very low impact, low blast radius on your customers. And a lot of people get canary mixed up with feature flags. Feature flags are about how you want to expose a new feature, and canary is about reducing the blast radius from a catastrophic failure. So they don't solve the same problem. You could have a feature flag that is actually causing failures, even though it's off, right? And so a canary would actually catch that. So I think it's part of your strategy. You want to have it as part of your rollout process. And canaries in the last couple of years have come a long way. People don't normally do them because they're viewed as complex, but the tooling has gotten really, really good on canaries. It's so much easier to do and handle and work. So I would say those big things. It's a policy engine that you're really making, and canary releases are a really big benefit.
Yeah, you highlighted the analytics and insights layer for the sake of getting the visibility and pointing out probably if some Jira ticket is getting held up for a long time, probably it's easy to identify that. And also like it helps in postmortem and few other things. So from an analytics and insights point of view, are there any KPIs that are critical for organizations to take into account to streamline their DevOps operations, especially in the context of Kubernetes?
Yeah, mean time to repair has been the long industry standard. If I have an incident, how long does it take me to fix it, right? How long is my service degradation happening? Mean time to change is another critical one. If from the moment I start writing code to the moment it's deployed in production, if I can cut that down, it has enormous benefits in my team's happiness, in our productivity, in the value we're getting. A lot of people don't think about it this way, but I really encourage this. Delivering software has a really great analog in the meat space world that is like the normal non-digital world, which is really inventory management. So if you look at companies who don't carry inventory, Apple is famous for this. If Apple's factories shut down, they would be sold out of everything within about 3 days. So they only have to carry about 3 days worth of inventory. So this is a supply chain, right? Their supply chain is so efficient that they don't have to carry any money on stuff that's sitting on shelves. Whereas if you look at their competition, most of them have 6 months worth of product sitting around. So that's quite a few millions of dollars that are sitting on shelves that could be, in their pockets being used to invest in new products and services. So there's a software supply chain. And you should think of it the exact same way. How do I make my software supply chain really efficient? Because if my changes take 2 weeks to go in production, each one is giving me incremental business value, right? And so you add that up over the course of the year. And if you're delayed by an average of even a couple of days in your release process, you could be leaving tens of millions of dollars on the table that your company could be recuperating, right? So your software supply chain is just so critical. And so that mean time to production, that mean time to deploy, that's a really critical metric that you have to think of, not only in terms of business value, but also developer happiness and also stability. If you do have a problem, if you do have a service degradation, how long does it take you to fix it? How long does it take you to roll new changes in? And it even goes to the security level. I mean, it impacts everything. The security level, almost every hack that's happened in the last 3 years has been on known vulnerabilities that were patched months or even years ago. But because the software delivery process wasn't hammered out, those services weren't getting updated, right? And so if you can do that, if you can have this process and you can work it out, you can have up-to-date software that's more secure. You can have faster changes, faster recovery times, happier engineers, more revenue, more market share. I mean, it just impacts everything. Everything is completely impacted by streamlining this DevOps process.
Absolutely. I think streamlining DevOps is critical for any organization of any scale, especially with Kubernetes allowing you to scale without having to worry about managing the nitty-gritties of the underlying components. Streamlining the DevOps pipeline becomes even more important. And I think Dan highlighted how it can be done. So, Dan, can you talk a little bit about what CodeFresh is doing, your platform? And you also have some announcement this week. Can you talk a little bit about that announcement?
Yes. So CodeFresh is a DevOps automation platform. And basically, we've built a platform to streamline DevOps, make it easier to deliver software, make you more confident in the delivery of that software. And so we've been around for a few years now. We've really been focused on Kubernetes and cloud native applications. We do service people that are doing VMs. And we do have customers that are doing that happily. We have people that are building Android apps on our platform too, but we really do focus on the cloud native tool set. That's where we find the biggest benefit and the most impact in the market. And this week we launched GitOps 2.0. It's really an evolution on the GitOps standards that have existed out there. And we don't really believe that we've fully reached the GitOps 2.0 standard, but what we have launched is visibility and observability components to the GitOps process. So this solves the problem of scale that I was talking about earlier, where if you're trying to figure out what's going on with all my services, what's going on, and how do I trace it back to Jira tickets, to commits, to who made the commits, who made the changes, and have it all linked together into a single view where it's actionable, and I can actually drill down to the specific moment that I had a service impacted, so I can figure out what changes were happening in production. That is really powerful. And so that's what we've released this week. So we're calling it GitOps 2.0, and you can learn more about it at codefresh.io. It's just sitting right there on the homepage. You can actually try it out on our platform. You can just try it now. You can jump straight into the platform and go set up your own GitOps workflow and see how it works. And of course, we have people on hand to help you realize it. And at the same time, we also have announced that we are going to be making some significant investments into the community. So we already have a number of open source projects that we're contributing to. Helm comes to mind, Argo CD comes to mind, Argo Workflows comes to mind. But we're going to be doing some follow-up announcements very shortly around some more concrete actions that we'd like to be doing in the community to promote these standards and come to solve some of these issues. Like I want to deploy to 10,000 clusters. How do I do that? How do I make it scalable? How do I realize the benefits of GitOps across any size organization? That's where we're going, and that's what we're working on today.
Awesome. And Kubernetes has been gaining a lot of traction in the enterprise, and we have yet another edition of KubeCon going on this week. And with Kubernetes, enterprises can scale at a level which they couldn't do it probably a few years back. But at that, when you are operating at that scale, you need to ensure that the DevOps pipeline is smooth, because otherwise any friction there is going to impact what you are trying to achieve. And that's where a platform like CodeFresh could come handy. Go check out codefresh.io. In fact, I signed up for that, and I even got $200 Google Cloud credit. So probably if you are deploying a Kubernetes cluster, that credit will come handy, and you can check out the CodeFresh platform too. Dan, it was a great conversation. It was great to have you, and looking forward to talking to you more about DevOps and what CodeFresh does in the coming months. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.